Good morning, Bucknutters. It's Thursday, September 14th, 2017. I'm Dan Rubin. This is the Bucknuts Morning 5 and Change. If it's Thursday, it's the Gem City, it's Gray, it's Steve Wiltfong in Indianapolis, Director of Recruiting for 24/7 Sports. Steve, have you had a smoothie yet today?
Had a smoothie for dinner last night after a large Mexican food lunch. So no smoothie yet today. I'm just drinking a bottle of water. But excited to be on talking about Ohio State and Ohio State recruiting with you.
We're going to do all of that, but we had a pregame discussion here that got fired up. So I'm going to give everybody my quick theory on why Ohio State does not look like the team everyone wanted it to be and why they've struggled over the last couple of years or so based on Ohio State standards. By everyone else's standards except for Nick Saban, they're fine. And here it is, and I shared it with Steve before the show. I'm going to share it again, let him comment on it.
And Nick Saban loses a ball game a year, too.
He does, and he doesn't enjoy the fan reaction or the press reaction to that, but we digress. If you look at the past few years and the model to which Ohio State is trying to get their team back to, the one missing element isn't a downfield passer, a downfield receiver, certain type of offensive line or scheme or offensive play call. The missing element is they no longer have Ezekiel Elliott. So as everything's gotten complicated and everyone's trying to figure out what's gone wrong, I have realized, I'm also a Cowboys fan and I've watched it, they don't have Zeke. If you look at every single, like the last game, I think everyone in Buckeye Nation would say that the Buckeyes played great was the win at Michigan a couple of years ago. And what's the key factor? They had Zeke. All of these things, all the games we talked about, Alabama, Oregon, Wisconsin, we had Zeke. And as we try and overcomplicate everything and figure out, the nuances of offense, I think the problem is simple. They don't have who is arguably the greatest football player walking planet Earth right now. I know that seems hyperbolic. The Cowboys are 14-3 in the regular season since he got there. I think that the off-field malfeasance he dealt with has taken our eye off the ball in terms of just how impactful he is. If you watch the Cowboys play, no person I've ever seen turns 2 yards into 6 like Zeke. Look at Alabama. I think the Cowboys have an audible, by the way. My kid picked it up when we were watching it, called Saban. And, by the way, Zeke gets the ball on the play. So that's my condensed theory. Do you think it's possible that the biggest problem with the Buckeyes and the reason they aren't what they were is simply because there's no Zeke to bail everybody out?
Well, he's a generational talent. But I look at Ohio State's roster, and I still see a team that's good enough to win the national championship, even with one loss. Now, obviously, the road gets a little tougher when you lose a ball game. But every year, one-loss teams are in the playoffs, and Ohio State still has an opportunity to bounce back from this. They'll have a big game against the top 5 team later in the season in Penn State. If you're Ohio State, you hope Wisconsin runs the table, and you get another undefeated opponent in the Big Ten championship, and you get a chance, and you hope that Michigan's undefeated when you play them in Ann Arbor. So actually that's not possible if Michigan and Wisconsin play each other. So either way, you hope you have a one-loss Michigan team and an undefeated Wisconsin or vice versa. So you get your opportunity to get 3 big wins, and then you hope it's enough to get back in the playoff. And Ohio State, they didn't play well against Oklahoma, but they still have a chance to bring this thing together, and they have the talent in the locker room. And as far as I'm concerned, they have the coaching staff in place to get it done.
Yeah, the fact that they're still in contention for the playoff is a factual statement. If you're ranked 8th or 9th and you have 2 teams on your schedule ahead of you, that's enough PowerPoint, as it were, to get yourself back up there. I don't think that's even an issue. They just need to play better. I think they need to feed, in light of what I said earlier about Zeke, they need to feed J.K. Dobbins and Mike Weber, build the team around the run, and let the chips fall where they may. Let's do what we do best and go from there. Okay, recruiting. Speaking of what we do best, Ohio State may not be ranked number one in the nation in football. They are ranked number one in the nation in recruiting. You had a very interesting article recently on Micah Parsons and the developments with the defensive end out of Harrisburg, PA. There's been some thought that he's no longer on the Buckeyes' radar. There's also been some thought that it's been a lot of smoke. What's the latest on Micah Parsons and his interesting recruitment? Obviously, what these kids have all said on Twitter has kind of taken the stage.
Sure, I think Micah Parsons favors Ohio State and Penn State. But I think right now, as it stands, and recruiting is always fluid, but as it stands right now, I think that Ohio State is pushing for Tyreek Smith and Jason Owe, and they just landed a defensive tackle, our number one ranked junior college prospect in the land on 24/7 Sports, and Antoine Jackson, to go with what's already in the boat, and Brenton Cox and Teron Vincent. And meanwhile, I also think that Penn State covets Tyreek Smith and Jason Owe. And with that, I think that Nebraska is the school that's recruiting Micah Parsons the hardest right now.
Yeah, I don't expect Parsons to end up at Ohio State. Read into that what you will. Speaking of Antoine Jackson, I think people are sleeping on this a little bit because he's a junior college guy. Lest we forget, he was one of the linemen we sat there and begged for and didn't get. And that trend of big dudes from the South, flirting with Ohio State, then heading elsewhere. But I could make an argument that based on his age and experience and talent, he could be the most impactful recruit they get out of this class. Is that possible to you?
Well, obviously he's going to come in and have the most ready background, having redshirted at Auburn.
Hold on a sec. I guess that's what I'm saying in terms of immediate impact.
Yeah, and I think that Jeremy Ruckert is in that discussion as well, because I think he's special, and I think he brings an element to Ohio State's offense that they don't have right now, which is that versatile tight end that can be a difference maker in the passing game. But yeah, I see your point and definitely concur. He's going to come in ready to play. He's at Blinn College right now, where he's already making a difference and being such a disruptive guy. He's so quick. I mean, he eats up double teams. He splits double teams. He's a factor against the run. He's a pass rusher in the middle. He's a guy that moves the pocket around, which then allows your defensive ends to wreak havoc off the edge. It was a huge get, and so you immediately put him onto the team, and he's mining the middle with guys like Draymond Jones, and I think it's a need on Ohio State's roster when you ask who are the difference makers in the middle next year. You know you love what's coming back on the edge, but who are your difference makers in the middle? I think that he's a guy that could come in and be an all-conference player right away.
Yeah, Draymond Jones will be in a much higher tax bracket at this time next year. I don't think there's any chance he comes back, especially with the way he's been playing. The dude is a beast. But I agree with you. Antoine Jackson and Teron Vincent in one recruiting class is ridiculous. You throw in maybe a Tommy Toe guy, and they've completely redone the position. I think you can make an argument that Jackson and Vincent be the most highly regarded tackles they've had come in recent memory. I'd be hard pressed.
You can lump Tommy Toe guy into that too. He's our number 2 ranked defensive tackle in the country, and like where Ohio State stands with him as well. Yeah,
so that's gluttony there, and it's the way they've always handled the position that can be an issue. They just crush it with recruiting. I don't want to have to go back into my Zach Bourne comparison. Last thing I want to talk about, Jackson Carman. We all know how good Jackson is. There's no question about his physical ability, kicking butt for Fairfield. He's an Ohio kid. But, man, he says some silly stuff on Twitter. His recent comment in his pissing contest with Herb Street, it really seems like he's trying to get at Herb Street and like threaten the guy with not going to his alma mater with a comment that made no sense. I don't understand how yes, you could say whatever you want about J.T. Barrett and USC's locker room, but if you said something about Sam Darnold, I don't imagine the Trojans would respond favorably. What's your vibe on Parsons specifically, and just kind of the way things have gotten now with kids saying stuff on Twitter that's just downright silly?
We don't become fully functioning in the male race till we're 25, Daniel. But with that, I mean, I think that it was very immature, those comments. I don't understand. I mean, is he threatening Kirk Herbstreit that he's not going to go to his alma mater because he didn't like what Herbstreit said on Twitter? And I guarantee that Dabo Swinney and Clay Helton roll their eyes about that comment just the same as everybody else in America. You know, I would bet that Dabo Swinney and Clay Helton weren't sitting there saying, "Thanks for helping us, Kirk," you know, and just loving that tweet. I don't think that they were applauding that and saying, "All right, Jackson, yes, our chances with you are now better." You know, I think that they're all sitting there with the same concerns. And one thing that these kids, the recruiting process entitles these young men sometimes, and they get a lot of coverage and national coverage, but what they don't recognize is that they're still not all that famous. And Jackson Carman is a high-profile recruit for the Ohio State Buckeyes, but I guarantee if you went inside the shoe on Saturday night for that packed house against Oklahoma and asked the entire stadium if they know who Jackson Carman is, I'd venture to say that 10% or less do. Recruiting's still a niche market. And don't get me wrong, it's a growing niche market, and the fans that follow recruiting are the biggest fans, and they know everything about their teams. But average Ohio State fan, an average Ohio State alum, they don't know who Jackson Carman is. They don't know who Michael Parsons is. And when these guys get in the college locker rooms, there's going to be a de-recruiting deal wherever they go. And now, Michael Parsons is a unique talent in this class, and he's a guy that he'll be tough to keep off the field wherever he goes in year one, because he's just an amazing player with an amazing skill set. But Jackson Carman, he's got work to do wherever he's certainly got top of the NFL first round type talent, but he's not going to walk into a college locker room ready to play on day one for a national championship contender without some work first. You know, he's going to have to shed, and he's, you know, going to have to become more detail oriented. And so these comments, it just adds on to the immaturity in my mind. It's just really, in my opinion, just stinks that he sent the tweet out, because it's just a poor reflection of him.
I could not say it better myself. We appreciate Steve stopping by and dropping some serious wisdom. Very interesting time to be a Buckeye. I encourage everyone to look outside and look up. The sky is not falling. Have a good one, Bucknutters.
Appreciate it, guys.